Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillah. This week we meet again in a weekly booster sessions. So for those joining us for the first time, this session is initiated to cultivate a reading culture among Malaysian and encourage sharing of reading materials among book readers. So for those who want to volunteer for book session, you can drop your name on our Facebook, and let me tell you upfront that if you volunteer today, your session will be after Raya, so you will have ample time to prepare. And I think that's it for the book review advertisement. Tonight, we have an interesting topic to discuss with our first male speaker ever, and we're going to listen to his book review on What Money Can't Buy, The Moral Limit of Markets, written by Michael J. Sandels. So to discuss this book, let me welcome Brother Hamzah Syahir. Hi, and Assalamualaikum, Hamzah.
Assalamualaikum, Mat. How are you?
Good, Alhamdulillah. How are you? Okay. Alhamdulillah, before we listen to Hamzah on his knowledge sharing, let me briefly share his background. Hamzah obtained his bachelor degree in economics from Islamic University Malaysia and currently working at Petronas with interest on reading in contemporary issue in various subjects such as econs, religion, philosophy, educations, and many more. So I really welcome questions from the floor. And if you need our speaker to repeat on any part or clarify certain terms, just write on the comment sections. Inshallah, I will read it on behalf. So to start the ball rolling, Hamzah, probably would you mind sharing with us why you choose this book for the weekly booster sessions?
All right. Okay. Thank you so much, Mat, for the introduction. I know your show is 15 minutes and I'm like the first male presenter, so more pressure on me. Hopefully I can live up to the expectation. So let me just share my slide. Am I sharing the slide?
The slide is up.
All right. Okay, good. So basically your question was why did I choose this book, right?
Yep.
Okay. So this book actually was written in 2012. So that was almost 8 years ago. So I think I read it during my undergraduate days. So you can tell how old I am by now. So we went to the same university back then. So basically I got into it first by listening to his talk on YouTube. So he has this series of talk called Justice. So his name is Michael Sandel. So he is a professor of government at Harvard. So he is the N.T. and Robert Bass T. Professor of Government at Harvard. So it's quite interesting just to share his designation there that he is sitting in an endowed chair, meaning that those two people, N.T. and Robert Bass, I did a quick Google before I came up. So they are what we would say as philanthropists. So they got rich through the aerospace industry. They have a corporation, Aryan Corporation, so they endowed a chair to education. So I think this is quite really interesting. I mean, it's really in the spirit of wakaf and things like that. So we can take what is good, we can take what is good from the West and try to encapsulate it into our own education system. So back then, I was listening to his talk. So he was giving the whole spectrum of ideas of Western philosophy from the Greeks, Socrates, all the way up to Cant and modern moral philosophers. So it was quite interesting because one of the things, I think if you can see the slide that we're on, this is actually the auditorium that he spoke on. So he has almost 1,000 undergraduate students here attending his talk. So it's one of the most attended talks at Harvard. So he's quite popular. So he's so popular that he even has followings in other parts of the world. And from there, I was reading his latest book back then, which was this book, What Money Can't Buy, The Moral Limits of Markets. So what he basically tries to show here is that markets are not as neutral as economists would like them to be. So he tries to put that idea into the students. So just maybe a bit on him before we delve deeper. So he was actually, prior to his interest in markets, he's one thing I like about him, he likes to write a lot on contemporary issues. So before he wrote on the markets, he wrote on bioethics. He worked on the Council of Bioethics under George W. Bush. So he is very attuned to all these latest developments of contemporary issues in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say this book is not that hard of a read. It's around 200 pages. I would categorize it as a popular philosophy books that you see a lot. I think in Kinokuniya and all this you can see in the right. There's a lot of popular self-help philosophy books. Like how to be a stoic and things like that. So I would say that his genre of books falls under popular philosophy. So just
Mm-hmm.
to touch on how popular he was back then. So he gave talks in Korea, Japan. But can you imagine? He actually gave a talk in Korea, and his talk was held in a stadium.
Mm.
So he had like I think 14,000 people attended his talk. So
Wow.
you can hear like politicians having 14,000 people attending, but to have an academician
Yeah.
speak in a stadium is something that is really out of the blue. And one thing why people like his style is because he is what we would say as aristocratic in his way, meaning that he asks questions. He will not tell the student that, hey, look, you're wrong. But
Mm-hmm.
instead he will do like what Socrates did. He question. So what is virtue? What is goodness? So he'll
Mm-hmm.
keep questioning, prodding the students' assumptions, and then that's why I think he's quite popular because of his style of engagement. He's not like one to say, okay, look, even though he has his own positions, without a
Mm-hmm.
doubt, but he will entertain those positions, maybe that are not aligned with him, but he will have a debate and a dialogue. So he really brings about that spirit about him. So people are always open. So if you actually see his YouTube videos, you can see that he is very engaging with his audience.
Mm-hmm.
So I think yeah. So moving on, maybe what I like to do is okay. This is the guy, and this is his book, in case anybody is wondering. So what I'll do is I will go through his main ideas, the main ideas of the book, because the book is kind of like you need to extract the main idea because it's structured in such a way as it's actually structured into 5 chapters, and the
Mm-hmm.
chapters are giving examples of where markets operate and how they go wrong. So
Mm-hmm.
rather than I'll go through the 5 chapters, but
Mm-hmm.
maybe we'll just go through his overarching idea basically. So
Mm-hmm.
okay, so I mentioned he is basically the professor of government at Harvard. Okay, so his main thesis, if you had to ask me what is my takeaway from this book, is that he argues that we have drifted from a market society. We have drifted to a market society from a market economy.
Mm-hmm.
So you may ask, what is the difference? So he
Mm-hmm.
highlights that the market economy views a market as a tool to achieve a desired end. So
Mm-hmm.
let's say if you want to achieve A, you can use the market to achieve A. But a market society means that it's no longer a tool. It has
Mm-hmm.
become overarching, like whatever it is the market can solve. The market can solve even for things which shouldn't be in the market, that they use the markets to solve those issues, even like social issues, for example. So in a way, he's not like a communist, Marxist, or like down with the capitalist system and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
His critique is a bit more nuanced in the sense that he's not criticizing capitalism per se. He's just saying that there are spheres where markets do not belong, and these
Mm-hmm.
spheres should use other forms of distribution, governance, and things like that, rather than to use a market. So
Mm-hmm.
he highlights this, and this he says that in today's world, and when I say today's world, this was back then in 2012. So you can imagine maybe some things are much more worse today. So some of the values, if I say numbers, it will be referring to the numbers in the book which was written back then lah. So it might have gone up through inflation or something. So
Mm-hmm.
basically, his idea is that markets have expanded and have gone beyond what it should be governed. I mean, where it should govern. It has gone beyond that. So the question is, in today's world, he says that there are two main reasons why markets have grown, and why they appeal to policymakers, to economists, to politicians. Okay, number one is that markets do not pass judgments. So what do I mean by this? So when we say markets do not pass judgment, it doesn't differentiate whether goods are high or low. So that means to them, reading and shooting an endangered animal to an economist. When I'm saying an economist, that I'm talking about a normal neoliberal economist. I'm not talking about the other schools like Marxist or feminist or whatever, but I'm just talking about the normal neoliberal main school that is dominant in academia, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So economists do not differentiate. That means like let's say if you are reading and if you are shooting an endangered animal, to them it doesn't matter. There is no goods that are higher or that is lower. So and here I think it's quite interesting. I think the Enlightenment philosopher John Stuart Mill, he said it is better to be a human dissatisfied than a pig satisfied. Better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a fool satisfied. And if the fool or the pig is of a different opinion, it is only because they only know their own side of the question. So here, even in the Enlightenment, there is levels of goods. You would rank read, for example, in my case here, you would rank reading to be higher than shooting an endangered animal for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And secondly, they provide equal weightage. So let's say you shoot a rhino, you get economists will talk about utility, which is the joy, the happiness, or whatever that you gain, the utility you gain from the activity. So
Mm-hmm.
here, for example, shooting and reading, to them, if you gain 10 units of utility and another, let's say, Mr. A receives 10 units of utility shooting a rhino. Mr. B gets 10 units of utility reading Lord of the Rings. So to an economist, both of them give equal weight in the calculus. So it's like to an economist, they're both equal. So this is the two things that appeal to market, because we don't want to make judgments. We appeal to markets because markets do not pass judgments and they give equal weightage. So to people, to policymakers, it looks fair. So yeah, so that's his why this utility maximization behavior has come about. So and this book, this What Money Can't Buy, is basically Sandel's attempt or revolution to bring up, to highlight this issue basically. And with regards to markets, he makes an interesting point. Basically, markets do not just allocate goods. That means you get A, you get $10, he gets $5, but
Mm-hmm.
also carries attitudes,
Mm-hmm.
or what we would say, towards the goods being exchanged. So for example, when we decide that a good should be able to be bought or sold, at least implicitly we say we treat them as commodities. So for example, let's say you can buy and sell kidneys.
Mm-hmm.
So you're treating the kidney as a
Goods.
commodity. And I think just recently in Malaysia, the most controversial issue of late was the sugar book incident. So that is treating people as commodities, for example. So basically, this idea of markets has infiltrated society. And or even, for example, I mean, ideas of justice of market. So for example, I think another issue, worldwide issue, is basically the distribution of the vaccine. So you have
Mm-hmm.
countries in the rich West having enough vaccines to vaccinate the entire population 3-4 times over. But then you have
Mm-hmm.
other countries who only have enough to vaccinate 10% of the population. So you can see that here markets are not necessarily fair. So
Mm-hmm.
it's like those who have money can afford to buy more. So, but there
Mm-hmm.
are certain things where he highlights that you shouldn't be able to buy and sell, even though by economic standards and logic, you should. It actually makes sense. Meaning that when I say economic logic and all, it means like willing buyer, willing seller, libertarian. You
Mm-hmm.
get utility. Both of you is not coerced. So, for example, he gives an example. Let's say jury duty. Jury duty need in US. We don't have it here. We used to have it in Malaysia, I think, way back then, but no longer. But jury duty in the West, if you are chosen as a jury, you can't actually pay a person. Let's say I'm chosen. It's my civic obligation and duty to become a juror. I can't just say, Imat, tolong, nah, RM100, can you please take my place in the jury? I don't
Mm-hmm.
want to do it. So
Mm-hmm.
there is civic responsibilities of being a citizen. So um, what is the consequence? So the consequence to Sandel, he highlights there are two important impacts with regards to markets expanding into all spheres of socio-economic life. One is inequality. people have no choice, they are coerced into a transaction. So this is the inequality argument. So for example, let's say you're a poor person in a rural area, someone
Mm-hmm.
comes up to you and says, hey, can I buy your kidney for 5,000 ringgit?
Mm-hmm.
So you sell your kidney, so it commodifies your kidney. But the question should be, is the person making the choice out of their free will, or are they
Mm-hmm.
coerced? So here what Sandel is arguing is that with markets, the more markets you have, the more unequal your society will be, and the gap between the rich and the poor will increase. Secondly, is that the argument from corruption. Argument from corruption, it argues that basically there are certain things that if you treat them as markets, it will devalue the good and promote attitudes which do not value it properly, even if those people transact willingly. That means number A tadi, kan they are at different power levels. Like someone is having all the money and all the influence.
Mm-hmm.
However, even if you are both on equal footing, the corruption argument still is valid, whereby there are commodities that shouldn't be valued as such. So he will go
Mm-hmm.
into examples, and we'll also go into examples. Um, so all right, so his book has 5 chapters, as I mentioned earlier. So he divides it into the five areas of the markets. One is jumping, 5 critiques of the markets where markets have expanded. For example,
Mm-hmm.
number one is jumping the queue. Second one
Mm-hmm.
is incentives. Third one is how market crowd out morals. Number
Mm-hmm.
four is markets in life and death. And number five is naming rights.
Mm-hmm.
So just to start, if you read the book, the first page, right, he will say, okay, there are things in today's world that are now for sale, that weren't for sale previously. So for example, let's say you were caught and you go to prison,
Mm-hmm.
and then you were like, oh, this room sucks, doesn't have water, or near, you can actually upgrade your room. Can you imagine that? In
Mm-hmm.
the US, you can actually upgrade your room. So just have a guess how much it costs for you to upgrade your room for one night in the US, in the prison. I mean, not all states. I forgot the name of the state, but have a guess. How
More
many
than
dollars do you think?
70?
Close enough. It's around $82. So you can upgrade your prison cell for one night for $82. So imagine if you're a rich drug lord or something. So you can easily upgrade your room to first class, business class all
Mm-hmm.
the way. So anyway, so he gives other examples. So for example, carpool lanes in the US, they have carpool lanes. So even if you're alone, you can actually pay $8 and drive on the carpool lane. And then things like immigration, he says if you have $500,000 and you can invest in the US, you can actually get a green card. And
Mm-hmm.
then things like surrogacy in India, whereby you the lady will give birth to a children and then give the child back to the original parents, meaning you're just a surrogate mother, you're not the actual physical mother. So he gives that. And then another one he gives is shooting endangered animals. For example,
Mm-hmm.
we know a rhino is endangered. How much do you think it costs to shoot a rhino? I mean, this is illegal. You mean this is like the government is allowing you to actually shoot a rhino, which is an endangered animal, where the money you raise through the shooting of the endangered animal goes to the fund to take care of the wildlife, for example. So have a guess how much it costs.
Probably 200.
$200.
Yeah.
It's a lot more. It's like 10 times. Well, it's $150,000 to shoot one
Oh.
rhino. So yeah. So you can imagine that means that you're valuing that the creature as such. So okay. So maybe we'll go into those were examples he raised in it. So jumping the queue. What does he mean by
Mm-hmm.
jumping the queue? So jumping the queue here, for example, he gave an example over there is Shakespeare and Co. It's just basically an orchestra. So this orchestra is for everyone. It's part of the civic. You want people from all walks of life to appreciate the arts, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, they give away free tickets. It's a line. It's a first come first serve. So
Mm-hmm.
basically, you're supposed to queue. But what actually happens is that people pay people to queue in line. And I think you can see this not just in this case, but maybe for this case, it's because the good is a civic good. We're not talking about queuing up for Apple overnight or
Mm-hmm.
PS5 or whatever, because those are individual goods that you get as a benefit. But here we're talking about goods which are not meant to be just used by you alone, but as
Mhm.
society as a whole. So he gave the example of the Shakespeare Orchestra, and then for example, in the US also, he gave another example, which is the US congressional hearing. So the Congress, which is like their government over there, has hearing. So for example, if you want a supreme judge hearing, let's say on a case, or that determines the way the law will be interpreted, for example. So people will queue up for that. So it's based on this egalitarian ethos of waiting your turn. So you're supposed to wait in line, you know. So but it's not necessarily the case that, you know, that's what happens, because those who have money will cut the queue. So that's what's
Mhm.
his argument there. So paying people. So things which were supposed to be communal, like that orchestra I was talking about, and then there were the congressional hearings, things like that, become controlled by those who have money. So
Mhm.
market prices here, so basically they reflect the people's willingness to pay, and those who are excluded are usually the poor.
Mhm.
So that's his critique of that. He's saying that basically there are some goods which you should distribute not based on money. For example, maybe it's based on need. So things like bantuan rakyat. So that is based on needs, meaning that kalau you are poor, you make below a certain amount of money every month,
Mhm.
then you should be entitled to it. Or for example, university places, it should be distributed based on merit. That means if you perform, you get straight A's, you get CGPA 4.0, whatever, then you should get the right to go to those to study those courses and at those universities. Maybe another option of distributing goods is through urgency. So, for example, you go to an operation theatre in a hospital. Who do you treat first? Of course, the person who is most likely to die. So,
Mhm.
if no treatment is given, so you have there based on need, based on merit, based on urgency, and there are things like based on chance. Lottery is based on chance. So there are different ways of distributing goods, but you should value the goods in such a way that you distribute it correctly. So he's
Mhm.
arguing that, you know, when people jump the queue for communal goods, then it goes against the spirit of egalitarianism. So secondly is incentives. So incentives here is, I think it's part of the, I think the expert you put on Facebook as well, whereby you know, it crowds out the for example, paying students to read books. You know, should you pay let's say a kindergarten or first grade student to what, $5 per book? So what actually happens is that his argument is that by paying people to read, it actually crowds out or erodes the intrinsic motivation, and it fosters an instrumental attitude. So you know, things like health bribes. Let's say if you lose weight, you pay them money, for example. Hunting a rhino or a walrus, sterilization for drugs, meaning that you make sure these people do not are not able to reproduce. I mean, drug users, because you don't want them to have children and pass on their habits and things like that. So there are cases in the West where they actually do that. They pay people so that they don't have children, so that the as long as they are drug users, so that, you know, they don't perpetuate this vicious cycle of poverty.
Mhm.
And this idea is basically this idea of economics able to solve all the social problems is coming from a Nobel Prize winning economist. His name is Gary Becker. He's from the Chicago School of Chicago University of Chicago. So basically, his argument is that everything has a price. It can be explicit. Maksud dia explicit ni, if katakan you go shopping ada harga.
Mhm.
So that is explicit. Katakan, oh, this book is 10 ringgit. That is
Mhm.
explicit. But implicit means that, you know, it's hidden, meaning that it is, you have to see through the action. So things like children, education, marriage, criminal activities. He tries to explain all this through the lens of economics. So, and what happens when you try to explain human behavior through the lens of simply economics is that you have schemes of economics where, you know, where you don't just limit economics to unemployment, inflation, but you try to solve economics through human behavior. For example, I don't know, have you ever come across this book called Freakonomics? It's quite popular back I think if you see it, it's usually dekat MPH, kat mana-mana semua ni, it's green in color. So it was way back then. So it's like basically they are economists. So basically what they say in here is that incentives are the cornerstone of modern life, and that economics at the root is the study of incentives. So basically, they're trying to reduce economics to the study of incentives. So basically they're saying that if you study the incentives behind it, you can find the cost benefit, the why people act in such a way. For example, I think the unique example where I remember from reading economics back then was the idea that Roe versus Wade, which is a court case in the US on abortion. So basically, their argument was that because abortion was allowed, the number of crime decreased because the
Mhm.
children who would have grown up in poverty wasn't born.
Mhm.
That's the kind of economic lens that they will try to apply to social issues.
Mhm.
So to them, it's basically that whatever problem economics can solve. So if I can
Mhm.
quote in economics is that a typical economist, this is
Mhm.
the writer there, I think his name is Stephen Levitt and Stephen Dubner and Stephen Levitt. No, they both start with Stephen. So basically they said that the typical economist believes that the world has not yet invented a problem that he cannot fix given a free hand to design the proper incentive scheme. His
Mhm.
solution may not always be pretty, it may involve coercion or exorbitant penalties or violation of civil liberties, but rest assured the original problem will be resolved. So
Mhm.
that's what where we're talking about incentives. So the third one is how markets crowd out morals. So this one is, I think, my favorite chapter because there are quite a lot of examples in here how markets will crowd out morals. So, for example, the most famous example, I think, is used in other books as well, is the Israeli daycare. All right. So there was a daycare in Israel. So social scientists decided to do an experiment there. So what they did was they noticed that parents used to pick up their children late. Let's say the cutoff time was 7, so they used to
Mhm.
pick up 8, 7:30, whatever. So it caused
Mhm.
an inconvenience. So what did the economists say? Hey, look, why don't we design an incentive scheme so that we can resolve this issue. So what they did was they gave a fine. So if you are late by half an hour or $10, you're late by any. So I'm just making up numbers here, but the concept is there. So when they did the experiment, what they actually found was that with a fine, actually the number of people picking up their children actually late actually increased rather than decreased. So
Mhm.
it's like totally opposite of what you expect the incentive scheme to come about, right? You expect
Mhm.
you have a penalty,
Mhm.
it should go down, right? But actually it went up because previously parents actually they took the initiative to try to come early because they realized that, look, this is a civic duty, I'm actually inconveniencing the people. But when you change it to a market transaction, meaning that they are compensated for that, meaning that you
Mhm.
pay, then they realize, tak apalah, I've already paid, so I shouldn't need to come and pick up early, so
Mhm.
they're willing to pay that fine. So and then the most ironic part is that, okay, they've done that, they found the findings, and then they decided, okay, let's lift the penalty. When they
Mhm.
lifted the penalty, it maintained the same number of late pickups, so it didn't go back down. So basically the idea of that civic duty tu dah tak ada, because you have introduced the market mechanism and then you try to remove it. It still goes back to the original level when it had the market mechanism, because the civic duty was no longer there, because people remembered that, hey, look, I picked them up late, it was a fine. So basically that was then.
Mhm.
Another example that's quite interesting is the book by Richard Titmuss, whereby he studied the blood market in the US, so between the US and the UK. So he found that the UK and US system had different, because the US system was a paid system, meaning you pay money for the blood to be, you get paid for
Mhm.
donating your blood. And it's not a donation now, but you get paid when you give your blood. And then for the
Mhm.
UK, it was a voluntary system. So what did they find? They found that the US system had chronic shortages, wasted blood, poorer quality, and higher contamination. This was a book by Richard Titmuss, the gift relationships. If anybody wants to read about it. So basically, and another example was in Switzerland. They wanted to find a place where they want to dump nuclear waste. So let's say they found a village on the outskirts. They asked the citizens, how much would it cost for you to accept me building this nuclear waste site? So
Mhm.
basically, they had two options. One is, I don't pay you anything. So if I
Mhm.
don't pay you anything, the rate of people accepting was 51%. but
Mm-hmm.
with the same issue, let's say it's the same thing, but I pay you $8,700, which was higher than the median income back then. Actually, the amount of people who accepted it actually dropped from 51 to 25. So here you
Mm-hmm.
have basically without any incentive, civic duty saja, 51% agree. But if you have money plus, if I say I pay you $8,700 a year,
Mm-hmm.
25% saja orang terima. It's the same ni, but it erodes the idea of civic duty. You as a citizen no longer want to sacrifice, and you feel that, oh look, I'm trying to be bribed, you know. But if you do it voluntarily, people are willing to do it. There's a lot more examples, but I think in the interest of time, I'll try to make it faster. So basically, critiques of this is basically there's one critique by Fred Hirsch whereby he says that supply of goods should not just be on commercial terms. You have other forms of exchanges you can use, like just now the gift altruism. So you can have different kinds of distribution mechanism for different kinds of goods. And basically that Aristotle argues, we become just by doing just acts, temperate by doing temperate acts, and courageous by doing courageous acts. So this idea that if you don't practice your civic duty, then it'll erode. So basically, altruism, civic spirits are not just commodities that are depleted with use, but you should view them more like muscles. Like people who go to the gym, they build their muscles. So your civic duty and all this should be built like a muscle, in the sense that you should use it. If you don't use it, then it will deplete, and society will disintegrate. And Rosu mentioned this. He says that as soon as public service ceases to be the chief business of the citizens, and they would rather serve with money rather than with their person, then the state is not far from its fall. So meaning that if the impact of marketization here and will erode the idea of democracy, whereby people start leading separate lives. They don't interact. They have different because they have different status, social status. For democracy to function, you need people to interact. Kalau tak, you live in your own world and you don't see what actually goes out in the other world. Like you mentioned, you have visited PPR. You have like a few NGO projects. So basically, these kind of things is what is needed in society, or else the idea of democracy will fall apart. And that's what his point is. Okay, so I'll go to the next one. Markets in life and death. So markets in life and death is basically it's not in Malaysia, but basically COLI is basically corporate. I can't quite remember, corporate life insurance or something like that. So basically, what this happens is that let's say you're a worker. Here they give an example of Walmart. So Walmart actually has insurance for their paid staff, but when the staff dies, it's not actually the family that gets the money; it's the company. So it becomes like, as a company, aren't you a bit, as a company, aren't you a bit weird that if you die, the value of your death to your company is actually more than if you're alive, for example, or and things like that. So it creates, it creates moral hazard, in the sense then why should I invest in the safety of my staff when actually if he dies, I actually get more. I'm not saying the companies kill him, but I'm saying that, and the ironic part is the companies, the person and the families did not know. So imagine you're sad, you're trying to find money and trying to bury your loved ones, but then your company makes 300,000 from the death. So basically, he's arguing that, and without your consent, you didn't even know the company took that policy upon you. Viatical is quite an interesting concept. It's viatical comes from the Latin word, which means voyage. So viatical means like this. Let's say you have a life insurance of 100,000. Okay. So what? And then let's say you have cancer, stage 4 or something. So there'll be people who come to you and say like, hey, Imad, I'll buy over your insurance. I'll give you $50,000 cash now. But if you die, I will claim your 100,000. So in a way, it's like a bet. You want people to die because because it's basically the faster you die, the better my ROI is, my rate of return. For example, let's say I take a viatical on your life. Let's say your insurance is 100,000, I pay you 50,000. and
Mhm.
then you die in 1 year. That is, and then in 1 year I get 100,000. So basically, that is 100% rate of return. Betul tak? I invest 50,000, I get 100,000. So
Mhm.
you're actually wishing for people to die here in this case. So these unethical practices actually are allowed over there. So that's what's viatical. I think death pool is basically you bet on people you don't know dying. So let's say, oh, I bet, it's usually artists, like let's say I bet, oh, Lady Gaga will pass away this next year, for example. So what's the rate? So that is a death pool, meaning it's a bet. And it's not like you kill the people, but it's still things that markets that should not exist. Death
Mhm.
bonds is similar to vertical, except that, for example, you make it into a bond. A bond is a corporate instrument. So you can combine, because the reason why they do bonds is because you want to avoid, let's say there's a miracle cure for AIDS next year. Then for all those people who have AIDS, your investment, quote unquote investment in people, would depreciate greatly. So death bonds will like, okay, you mix and match lah. Here is cancer, here is diabetes, here is AIDS. So you
Mhm.
try to diversify, quote unquote diversify your risk lah.
Mhm.
Okay, and lastly is naming rights. So naming rights is basically, he gave example of like stadiums. Last time everyone used to stay in the stadium, get wet together. Now you have skyboxes, which is like private areas. And then police cars. When I say police cars and hydrants, means that you have corporate advertisement on police car. Let's say police car driven sponsored by McDonald's. So or
Mhm.
hydrants, for example, hydrants for the fire, jails and schools. So basically all these sort of items are up for sale. So he's questioning whether you should have markets. You should be able to, because police is supposed to be a civic duty. For example, he gave a quite interesting example when it comes to a fireman. So there was this country where in the county in the US, which had a private fire, like a fire brigade. So this house didn't renew dia punya, sorry, there was this public house which was on fire, right? And then there was the private fire brigade was around, but they didn't put out the fire because to them it is not part of their obligation. Because even though the house is on fire, they were there, they could do something, but they didn't do anything. The only reason why they were there was because the house beside the house that was on fire had fire insurance with this company, so they had to
Mhm.
ensure that the
The
fire didn't
another
spread.
house.
Yes,
Yeah.
but the ironic thing is that they didn't even put out the fire of that house. So here is like a quite an interesting example. So okay, so these are the five main areas he talked about, and then solutions. He doesn't really have, because he likes this Socratic dialogue punya process, so he doesn't really have a solution per se. So his solution doesn't have a chapter on it, but he just discusses generally what you should do. So he argues that you should have limits, you should have discussions on the conception of the good life. When he
Mhm.
says the good life is what you value in life. So those are some of his suggestions. So he gives suggestion. He doesn't have like a policy like, oh, you should ban kidney sales, you should ban smoking, you should outlaw this and this or that. So he doesn't have concrete policy solutions per se, but he gives like general overarching ideas on what you should do as society.
Mhm.
So the second point here, he says is that you should reinvigorate reinvigorate the terms of public discourse. So you should respect people, but you should engage competing views. You shouldn't just resort to the market and think that the market is morally neutral and can make decision on its own. So the
Mhm.
third one, he says that we should bring back languages with moral implications, things like debasement, defilement, loss of sacred. So these are languages which are morally charged rather than just the dollar and cents punya cost benefit analysis of economics. So he's saying that
Mhm.
we should have moral commitments, bring back this discourse into policy making,
Mhm.
rather than just taking things at face value. And lastly is that he's saying that the spiritual and moral commitments, this one I think I mentioned, was you should bring it in the discourse rather than just expecting the market to decide for you. And think, wait, sorry, yeah. Okay, so last one, he says that citizens have a common life. Basically, I think we touched on this, whereby you want people from different sectors of society. He would criticize the idea of a gated neighborhood, for example, because you don't have interactions between different classes of people of society, for example. So he's saying that when you have that, and then the rich control the political process, then the poor will be left behind. I remember watching this documentary on economics, The Inside Job. So inside there, he was, which is basically on the collapse of in the 2008 financial crisis in the US. So
Mm-hmm.
the president or the CEO of Goldman Sachs, actually, he had a private elevator to his office. So in a way, when he came to office, he didn't have to meet anybody from his company. He
Mm-hmm.
just went in, the elevator went straight to his office. So he didn't interact with the other traders, so you need that kind of interaction. So yeah, so basically his argument is that citizens need to interact with people and have from different backgrounds. And okay, so I've actually just finished the book that was in from 2012. But you might be
Mm-hmm.
interested to know he just wrote a book, I think late last year or early this year. I think you can get it at Kinokuniya and a few other local bookstores like uh, Kafilah Buku, Pelita Zihin. They sell this book, The Tyranny of Merit, What's Become of the Common Good. So here, I think it's quite interesting. And he also has a cartoon version if you just want a 3-minute video on his talk. So one of the things is that he anticipated the coming of Donald Trump. So he actually wasn't surprised that Donald Trump won, because he said that the people in power had meritocratic hubris, whereby they lost touch of those below them, the society, the challenges of society at large. So this is would be an interesting book to delve more on, because he explains more, he expands more on the limits of markets, but he's trying to say that you should have discussions on what's of the common good.
Mm-hmm.
And lastly, I think this would be my last slide. Okay, so I'm not sure if there's any questions, or because I think maybe I tried to cover a lot in such a short space of time. But I think I've exceeded my time. So yeah, so
Yeah,
I'll end it
question.
with questions if you have any. So with that, thank you so much for your time, and I leave you with a comic if you want to read on it. This is about economics as well, as I found it a bit funny. So yeah, so if you have any questions.
Okay, so a question from audience. Salam Hamzah, nice presentations, very engaging. Question is, would this be a page turner for someone with no economic background?
If you like, in, if you like if you like questions, like you like to think about stuff, it's not a difficult book. You don't have to have a basic in economics. You can read it just as just like you read self-help book, for example. You don't need a background in psychology or science, for example, to appreciate his arguments. It's not too complicated. It's not too high level. It's not like a book by Cant or something like that, one of those philosophers. It really brings it down to the level where you can engage it. So and it's only 200 pages. So I say that if you're interested, give it a shout out. Because the reason why I like it is because not many people. I mean, economics. Most economics is basically maths. We have forgotten what is the humanistic aspect. When I say the humanistic aspect, is the like Adam Smith. Before he wrote the Wealth of Nations, he wrote the Theory of Moral Sentiment.
Mm-hmm.
So this humanistic soft side of economics used to be part of philosophy. People used to think of them as natural philosophers. Aristotle wrote about interest. He argued that interest is unnatural. So basically, economics goes back all the way back to the Greeks. It's a very long history. So it's quite interesting to go into the history and development of economics, rather than just the maths of it. Like nowadays, you just see the graphs, but actually, it's quite a deep uh, subject. So you can see the history of it. Yeah. So yes, I'd say yeah.
Okay, I think there is no more question from the public. Cuma ada tanya soalan, why are you ending so soon?
I think think I extended your ni. It's supposed to be weekly booster 15 minutes, right? But I
Yeah.
calculated, yeah, it's 45 now. So I think you need to change your weekly boosters. No, I
Yeah.
noticed even the previous ones are not 15 minutes. So maybe you should try to put it as 30 minutes moving forward, because to summarize a book in 15 minutes would be quite difficult. I'd say, especially interesting books. So, unless you just want to just high level concept, then it's probably possible to do it in 15 minutes. But yeah, so just a suggestion for you.
Okay, thank you so much, Hamza. I think my take on this is the very reason why I agree for Hamza to share this book, because I think we need to educate more people on this topic and make more awareness, so that people can really think about this. Though in Islam we have the the timbangan for it. I mean, we already learn it, tapi because kita mungkin duduk dalam dunia moden sekarang, we exposed to a lot of ideas where sometimes we thought that the certain things they, okay, banyaknya komen, certain things we do are okay, uh, sebenarnya kadang-kadang dia mungkin bertentangan dengan concept of benefit itself. So this is the very reason why we bring up this topic this week. With that, I think thank you Hamzah for your sharing, and inshallah we meet again in maybe next round after
All right.
Raya.
Okay. Thank you very much for having me. So it's been a pleasure. So I hope we had some benefit from this short sharing session, I'd say.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Assalamualaikum.
Wassalaam.